Celia, do you mind going first?
Wow, yeah, probably they would say that I'm a good parent.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. Nani, what about you?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with you. I think my parents, so I do work at REI and inclusion marketing, and I'm also a consultant with the diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting company. And I think my parents are slowly starting to understand what that means. Of course, what diversity, equity, and inclusion means today is relatively new for a lot of folks, particularly for my parents who immigrated from India to the US in the 80s. And so this concept of figuring out equity for different identities in the workplace is somewhat different. But I would say that knowing me my whole life and my reluctance to just accept the status quo, whether that be what was considered smart or beautiful or successful or professional or any of those sort of shoulds, I was always very reluctant to accept those. And so I think what I do now really embodies that way of thinking. And so I think that they can see the synergy there.
That's such a beautiful answer. I like the shoulds aspect. I think all of us can relate to some of those shoulds that our parents or family members or even society kind of place on us. So thank you for that perspective. Susanna.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm also very happy to be here. This is actually a really great question because my family still to this day asks me this all the time, and my friends, they always want to know, what exactly do you do? And they would probably say, she works in regulatory, she works with the FDA, she works a lot, which is true, but it's not everything that I do. It's only one aspect. I actually work with manufacturers who are developing new devices and work with them to develop a regulatory strategy, working with many departments with clinical research and development, with marketing, to develop a strategy of what markets we want to enter into, what global requirements are necessary to enter those markets, and then help them build a story, a pre-submission package around the device, and then present this to the authorities. So in the US, yes, that is the FDA, but I also work with many other countries like Canada and Japan and Australia and the European notified bodies. It's a very exciting, relatively new field that is getting more recognition. In the past, it was seen as just something kind of the evil necessary that you have to do. And now there's a realization that it's actually a really good career. It's really great to have a good regulatory strategy, and it will help your business get devices on the market that will really help patients and physicians and impact people's lives. So I'm very excited about it, very passionate about it, and have been doing it for more than 15 years, but I still get the question.
Yes, yes. I love the context of, you probably just say I work a lot too, because I could definitely relate to that piece of it as well. Thank you so much for that context and beautiful explanation into what it is that you do. Brianna.
Thank you so much for having me. I think what my parents and family would say about my job is that I love it so much that I started my own company to do it more. So I work in learning and development. So my work is really focused on helping individuals and teams understand like what they do best and being able to put language to that. When we go to interviews, we say like, I like to help people. Okay, so does everybody else. So how do you really differentiate yourself as you're trying to be your best for that interview, for that job? And so working in two different spaces. So I work for Washington County as the Learning and Development Program Manager. And so I'm really making learning, fun and setting up new programs for all employees who work for Washington County. And then after I close my computer for that, I, switch to my other computer and start doing my work, which is the refining company. So really helping people to develop their office confidence and understand how to unapologetically articulate who they are so that they can bring about a good sense of career well-being. And that's really what I do. And so my family would say, well, she's a workplace cheerleader you didn't know you had. So I'm always super excited about other people and how they show up and just make people feel good about who they are and how it is that they show up.
That's such a beautiful response, and I can definitely relate to the element of just doing what it is that you love and transitioning into what it is that you are enjoying doing. For me, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And like, if I could talk about it all day, I would. And so I do. I would love to now transition into our discussion questions. And we actually formatted this a little bit different where y'all know which questions you'll be answering. And I will read the question off and then advise kind of who's first and who's second. So the first question that we have is, in what ways have you truly felt seen and heard in your profession? And let's start with Celia one more time.
Thank you, Courtney. I feel so privileged to be here, part of this panel among all the wonderful panelists today. I have been working for 23 plus years in the healthcare industry, both in India and here. What I've seen so far is the intersectional identities is one of the most important things that I've found, which is important to me. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a musician, I'm a parent, I'm married to a beautiful woman. I love, I'm a singer, song composer. I love hiking. But the one thing that I found, the way the corporate industry looks at me is Celia is trans. All the elements of my intersectional identity is gone. You know, they don't think about it that I manage a $250 million portfolio. I worked for a clinical trials company, managing a portfolio of 250 million, developed BPO businesses across the world. Everything just comes crashing down when the companies just look at you as, oh, you're trans. And that's what hit me most when I came out as Celia. And I've been working in the industry for a long time as Daniel. But what I've seen is, and what I tell the companies is, if you want to make a true change in your company, start from the bathroom all the way to the boardroom. And that's where you can make meaningful change in your DEI within the company. And one of the things that I also advise, so I have my own company, Rubicon Consulting is based on my daughter. Her name is Rebecca. So I started this company, Rubicon Consulting, and I was discriminated in some of the companies that I came out with. And I came out and I told them that I am gender non-binary and I'm trans femme. I want to transition, but unfortunately I was in an executive position in these companies. It was difficult for me to come out because I was 3 levels below the CEO. So the companies would not appreciate senior leadership in that kind of level. There is something missing in the diversity equity here. You know, you can talk about diversity all day long, but if you don't live the life and if you don't show the employees what exactly you're doing, we have a problem. And that's where I started coming out and I started consulting some of the companies that I was working with. And I'm now consulting one of the a big 20, it's a big biopharma in Southern California. I'm consulting with them. And I see a big change in these companies. And what I've seen is my voice needs to be heard. Since it's hot off the press, I was applying for a job in a company and I was supposed to be onboarded. And my agent told me that, Celia, we cannot onboard you. And I said, why? And they said, oh, because we have a security issue. I said, but I think this company is accepting, they have done, you know, they are really accepting to trans. And I have spoken in the company at the leadership level in the panels, what's going on? See, I index is 100%. And I started asking all kinds of questions. I said, Celia, I don't know, you need to talk to this company. I called them and asked what's going on and why was there a security issue? The answer that came back was, we don't know how to onboard you. Companies are willing to be inclusive, but they don't know how. And that's what I've seen. And I said, okay, I can guide you because I have written policies for companies to hire transgender, non-binary, and intersex community. I can hire you. But they were looking at me with a cisgender lens and they said, oh, we want to hire you, but we don't know how to hire you. And that's when I said, you know, you need to figure it out because 27% of the youth in California in 2019 identify as gender non-binary. And I don't want to be onboarded as male or female. I'm an X. My gender marker is an X. So if you don't have it in your company, you need to figure it out. The regulatory agency, the compliance officers, the security officers, the every HR, DNI group, the pride group within the company, they all got together, they discussed, and they finally onboarded me. So that is half of the heart of the press. And it's been 2 weeks working with a client. I want to be seen the way I want to be seen. I don't want to be seen the way the companies want to see me. And that's where I think we're here to make a difference, because the companies that are diverse ethnically, they are 33% more profitable than their peers. And companies that are really, really doing well have a great diversity at the senior level, not just at the senior level. The change doesn't come from the letterhead of the company, but from the heart of the employees. And I always talk about this because if you want to have excellent profit margin, want to meet all your Wall Street expectations, you can do that, but focus on empowering your staff, empowering your workforce. And that's what I was proud that I could do it. Change the culture of a $27 billion company that they have never implemented in the past 30 years. So yes, we can make a change. We can be seen, we can be heard, and it is possible.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Celia. What a beautiful answer. And I even wrote it down of like, I want to be seen the way I want to be seen and not the way the company wants to see me. And then I really also appreciated that the change really happens in employees' hearts. And I think in business school, especially, we definitely forget that at times. And so I really appreciate having these sorts of conversations to not only challenge us as leaders, but also move these conversations into our classrooms so that we can start collaborating and moving the needle that much further, because we all think that we're strong leaders until we're really met with some adversity. And then we are like, oh, maybe that's not me. And then a lot of us pass it on to like, oh, well, maybe that's someone else's thing. But it's all of our things. So I really, really appreciate that context. I'm going to reread the question for Susanna, because I know some people have come in a little bit later as well. So this question is, what ways have you truly felt seen and heard in your profession? And this question is for Susanna.
Yes, thank you, Courtney. Sometimes I think it's difficult to know if you're truly being seen or heard, especially if you're in a larger company with many roles and functions and departments and different leaders. For myself, I really early on in my career focused on gaining experience and knowledge in my field and really making sure that I knew the regulations, I knew the requirements, and also on my work ethic. And for me, it's very important to do good quality work, to stay true to myself. And I built a reputation for not only being knowledgeable, but for being honest and transparent. And when I would kind of join in project timelines with teams and make decisions, I was always very realistic and feasible with my timelines, even if it's something that management doesn't want to hear. Of course, they want you to push harder, faster, do everything as quick as possible. And sometimes that's just not realistic. And I didn't want to put my team with undue burdens and pressures as well. And so I've always been very true and push back on management and say, no, this is really the realistic timeline. This is what we can do. This is what's feasible. And I realized that I was really being heard when I would have colleagues come to me for advice, for my expertise, or when I had the VP of R&D actually call me one day and say, oh, Azucena, I want to get your opinion on this project because I know you will be honest with me. I know you will tell me the truth. Is this really realistic or not? And that's when I really realized, okay, I do have this reputation because I've stuck to my work quality, my ethics, and I've been true to myself.
Thank you, Susanna. I really hear like I feel seen when someone realizes my value on the team. And I definitely feel the same way. I'd love to transition into our next question, which is many of us are leaders and lead teams. So I would love to know what strategies you use to ensure that folks feel welcomed around you. Let's start this one with Brianna.
Unmute myself there. Thank you. So for me, there's this phrase, and I'm so sorry that I don't remember who said it, but I try to listen with the same passion in which I want to be heard. Like, I'm a person who loves to, state my case and share what it is that I want. But in order for me to be able to, support others, it really is helpful for me to mirror the kind of energy that I offer by being able to also just being quiet and being able to listen to other people. It's really helpful for me to also reflect back, what people are saying, so they know, okay, when I'm around Brianna, like, I get a chance to get a word in edgewise too. I have an opportunity to be able to know that she's paying attention, that it's, Courtney, we laughed the other day about me doing my hand. It's like, being forward in my chair and really looking for an opportunity to give space and elevate the comments of others. And, there's some people in the chat who are like, hey, can I see all of the panelists, not just, the one person speaking? And what's so important about that is that then when I do that, it gives me an opportunity to then see who was trying to unmute or who was trying to speak up, but, kept getting spoken over. And so being aware of that helps people to say, oh, okay, if I'm in a conversation with Brianna, she's going to give me some airtime. She's going to give me the opportunity to state what it is that I want to say. I love a good debate. So I'm happy to, I tell people, fight me on what it is that I'm saying. I'm interested in hearing, your ideas. I'm interested in, offering ideas that I'm not married to. I have this thought. I'm trying to break up groupthink. So, I'm just going to say this thing. If you like it, let's talk about it. If you don't, let's build upon it. And the last thing that I'll just, say is that, for me, it's also about modeling vulnerability, being able to, hey, I made a mistake here. Anybody else, ever felt like that? You just made a mistake or had an issue. So my welcoming of people is really about just showing it's like, I'm here to listen. I'm also here to, share my thoughts as well. But I want to be able to support, this conversation in a way that makes it so that both of us or all of us have an opportunity to share our thoughts, and then also holding space for, for others who, might not be as vocal as I am, but also I know, have some brilliant things to say. And I want to hear that. So I welcome all that discussion.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the fight me or challenge me to really provide that sense of feedback, because if people can't be real and honest with you, what are you doing? I would love to hear also from Asuswena.
Yep. So I think that teamwork, collaboration is extremely important. And through my experience, I've realized that having a good team spirit is only going to build good collaboration. You have to really be able to trust each other, rely on each other to actually get projects done. And so what I like to do is work with my team to coordinate events, to organize happy hours, to recognize good work, to give team members the ability to give a little bit of a spotlight shine moment, like maybe they present status update in a project meeting or to the board and kind of get the recognition for the work that they're doing. And I also sometimes think it's nice to do things a little bit differently. So when I'm kicking off a new project, I might do it with like a breakfast meeting or a lunch meeting, and then start with like an icebreaker game so that people have the chance to interact in ways that they normally wouldn't do and learn a little bit more about each other. And just really recognizing the strengths of individual team members. There are some team members, like Brianna was saying, that are very vocal and like all the attention. And there's others that are more shy, but like to be recognized in other ways. And so finding ways to kind of be inclusive and recognize everybody for their strengths, I think it only makes a stronger team altogether.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really appreciate the team aspect and just allowing everyone to bring their, I like the word authentic self. And I think when you have those icebreaker activities, at least for me, it brings out this childlike sometimes personality that I definitely don't necessarily have in the workplace generally, but I get a lot more excited and competitive about when it's an icebreaker activity. So I really appreciate that. I would love to transition into our third question now, which is, we can be bombarded with criticism, often about the way we communicate and how we assess feedback and criticism and decide how do we, I'm so sorry, and I'd love to know, how do we assess this criticism and feedback to decide if it's worthwhile or worth throwing away? I would love to start with Nani.
Sure, thank you. I think the first thing I would recommend around criticism about the way we communicate is to first check in with yourself. I think so often women, and especially women of color, are taught to not believe yourself, and that your feelings and your intuition and what you feel in your body is not real or valid. And we've been taught that time and time again. And so what can happen is we get criticism from other people, particularly folks from different identity groups, and we want to jump to there to tend to them rather than to first tend to ourselves. And by taking some time to really unpack what you're feeling in this moment, you might be able to start to tease apart where that feedback or criticism is coming from. And oftentimes it's coming from a lot of bias. I'll give you a couple of examples just to share. Once recently, in the last couple of years, I was expressing my deep frustration with the continued violence against people of color in our country. And I was feeling really frustrated with the way that particularly white folks in my community were not talking about it. And I was feeling just angry. I was feeling angry. I was feeling alone. And I had somebody, a white person in my community, say to me, "You're making me feel a lot of shame when you do this. I would recommend you take another tactic so that people don't feel shame." And at first, and I felt it viscerally in my body, my heart rate jumped up. I felt so angry and upset and confused. And what I had to tease apart was that this person was centering their comfort rather than our mutual collective responsibility to care for one another and understand what we needed to do as a community. And so as I sat with that and I realized that, sure, empathy is better than shame. What I wasn't doing was shaming people. What I was expressing was my frustration, which was valid. Then I was able to hold that to be true and continue forward, which was what I really wanted to do. And so I share that example as one. Another example in the business setting was a close friend of mine who's a woman was presenting something to a boardroom, something she was particularly passionate about, and she started to cry and was told by a male leader that she shouldn't be crying in a presentation and that that's unprofessional. And again, right, her reaction was, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't. But if she could just take that moment, pause and listen to her body, which was, I'm really emotional about this topic because I'm human and we have emotions and I'm allowed to have those feelings, then it would allow her to say that, no, this is not about being professional. This is about me being a human. And so I think having that space and time is so critical. Of course, sometimes feedback and criticism is so important too. And it's great for us to learn from one another and get real input from people on how our actions and behaviors land. And so I think the fundamental thing that I always remind myself of is that two things can be true at once, that I can be having a personal reaction that's valid and important, and maybe I could think about different ways in which it might land for people depending on the intersectionality that's in front of me. And being able to just parse that apart, sit with it and think about it, but not make any decisions because of what I should have been doing in the moment. So that's my advice around feedback.
Thank you so much, Nani. I really I really appreciate how you prefaced it and started with a lot of times our feelings are made invalid. And I do think that there's also, that erasure that happens with women of color voices and perspectives and emotions as well. And so thank you so much for that preface before you provided more insight there. Up next, I would love to hear more from us, Susanna.
Yes, thank you. This one really resonated with me because I think, especially as females and strong, confident, independent females, we often get criticism or feedback that maybe we're too direct or a bit too overpowering. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to hear that kind of feedback because I think as females, especially in business settings, we have to find the right balance where we have to be serious enough so that our colleagues take us seriously. And at the same time, not be too overly confident where our other colleagues can be a little bit intimidated. And I've come to realize that this can also be very cultural, especially since I've relocated to Switzerland. So I live in Zurich now. And I've realized that it's very much viewed here being overly confident as being too direct and a bit overbearing. And I've been told that my work style is a bit too American and that I needed to subdue myself a little bit. And what I've realized is that it's, first of all, kind of picking out what's actually valid, constructive feedback and what I can use to build myself and grow professionally. And what, like Nani says, is just maybe a bit biased. And I've realized that here, it's definitely very cultural. People tend to be very neutral, no conflict at all. They don't like to hear the word no. They like to hear very soft, roundabout ways of saying no. So I've learned to adapt myself a little bit. But through my career, what I've learned is that it's actually very important how people view you and how you are perceived, especially for professional growth. That very often promotions are not necessarily based on your competence, on your technical expertise, or on the work that you've accomplished, but actually how others view you. And some companies even base promotions on feedback from other colleagues, from other managers, from board members, and then make the decision whether or not you deserve the promotion. And so sometimes I feel like it's important to take the feedback or criticism with a grain of salt, but also use it as an opportunity to maybe improve, to grow from this, to realize, okay, how can I change my communication style? Talk to your colleagues. One thing I've learned in Switzerland is that when somebody says, let's grab a coffee, it usually means let's have a chat. I have some feedback for you. So take it on board, have the coffee with them, have these chats, learn how you can adapt. And definitely one thing I strongly recommend is using coaches, using mentors, using people who can help build you, and really focusing on your strengths and learning how to build your brand based on your strengths.
Thank you so much. That was actually one of the conversations that we had in our program, because so much of leadership is really centered often on your weaknesses and improving those weaknesses. And we definitely had a conversation around emotional intelligence. And oftentimes it's really building off of those strengths and knowing your weaknesses and being more aware of your tendencies and building people around you that will nudge you and let you know when you're doing that thing, and honestly being a lot more transparent about how you show up. For me, I'm definitely like a pace setter and driver. And when there's a big goal ahead, I can definitely lose sight of the relationships, which oftentimes is irritating for people since I'm in DEI. Like, you're supposed to care about people. Like, I do, but I kind of get lost in the strategy of it all. So the reminders are super helpful. So thank you so much for that. We have another question, which is, one part of being heard is finding your group of allies to speak with you collectively. How do you use your voice to amplify others? Brianna.
Well, as that workplace cheerleader you didn't know you had, I love being able to find ways to elevate, the voices of others. And for me, what I feel is that a rising tide raises all ships, right? So it doesn't harm me to be able to say, oh my gosh, I heard from this great panelist today. Her name was Nani. You need to know her. Like, oh my gosh, I need to get you in touch with Celia or with, Asazana. It doesn't harm me to do that. And so I take the position of being able to say, what are the things that people in similar circles to me are doing that I can, repost on LinkedIn and say, hey, go to her event, looks great. Like, hey, you should be there. I'm so proud of you, cheering you on all the way. It takes 5 seconds for me to take the time to be able to, pump up other people. And I do it not because I'm hoping that they'll do the same in return, but because I want others to see women supporting women. I want, especially women of color, we find ourselves in spaces where we're like the only one. And then you see another one that's like, oh, I'm going to size you up. Like, are we competition or are we, comrades? Like, what are we going to be? But I truly believe that there's enough for everyone, because what you do is for you and your community. What I do is for me and my community. And there are people that, really want to work with you that think I'm cool, but don't want to work with me so much because we're not the same, and vice versa. And so I take this attitude of abundance everywhere that I go that allows me to be able to fearlessly support other people. And I do it, and the way that I do it, I see the fruits of it every day, honestly, every single day. And I'm grateful to that. And so it's just a mindset for me that it's like, there is enough, and what's for me will continuously find me, only because I've put in the time to be able to support and uplift other people. So, that happens, in the workspace where, again, if somebody was, or a woman was maybe passed over, or their comment was, of course, re-articulated by, a male, in the room, it's like, hey, Brad, that was great. And Asazana just said that. So Asazana, I'd love for you to expound on that point. Like, there's a fearlessness in me that comes to say, I heard you, but I heard her first. And so I sometimes will raise my hand simply to be able to say, I don't have anything to say, but I know that, that Courtney did. So Courtney, would you mind? So it's really about, being unapologetic about the fact that, like we were saying at the beginning, we deserve to take up space. And I will help you do that, because I know, and I just walk around with this idea that you would do the same for me, because you want me to do well, right? Right? Yeah, I know you do. Even if you don't tell me, I know that you do. And so if I walk around almost paying people back every single day to be able to say, I'm opening this door for you, and one day you might have a door that you could open for me. You might be able to speak my name in a space that, that I can't get into. So I'm thanking you in advance for what you haven't done for me yet. And I'm grateful. So my gratitude shows me elevating who you are and your platform.
Beautiful. I was never a cheerleader, but I do think in the workplace that's probably, even though I said I don't necessarily care about the relationships, that's one thing that I do well, of like recognizing when someone is, their talent is just shining, and knowing like, this is your thing. Be front and center in this space. So I really appreciate that context and calling people into that space. Again, I would just like to repeat the question of, how do you use your voice to amplify others? And Celia.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's such an important question that made a lot of sense just last year, during the George Floyd murder that happened. I went to my trans friend and said, a Black trans friend, and I said, Lucky, how do I be your ally? What can I do to be your ally? And like what Brene was talking about is providing that platform to people who can resonate that voice much better than us. Because I asked him, I'm in a space where, how can I learn and be an ally for you? And Lucky said one thing, which is he's a trans man who is running an organization called Invisible Team. And he told me, Celia, be in places where I cannot be my voice where my voice is not heard. And that's what makes a big difference. And to me, being a human being is what is so important than being a professional or being a CEO of a company or being so good in what I'm doing. People lose that human aspect, and sometimes you become so professional or you become so political. And that's what I feel that, as employees of a company, always humanize our issues, don't politicize it. Don't add a Wall Street number to it. We are not Wall Street numbers, but we are employees that can make a difference in your company, where we are adding to your productivity and your profitability and your culture and innovation of that company. But that kind of an allyship should happen within the employees. If you see the great resignation that's happening in the past few months, or even quite recently, it's still happening. A lot of it is, when you look at a company and the people and the process and the technology, it's all been focused on how do you make money, how do you make revenue, how can I quickly grow, how can I be successful. People don't talk about vulnerability. People don't talk about the pain that they're going through in the workplace. And that's what is changing, that a lot of employees now are saying that I don't want the job because I've been working too hard. I don't want this job because I had a toxic environment. I don't want this job because a promotion is not what is important to me. I need a work-life balance. Now, the employees and people are in the workforce are starting to think about how you can change the workplace. In 2025, 60% of the workforce are going to be millennials and Gen Zs, folks like you in the call, folks like you who are listening from the School of Management. You're going to be the leaders of the company, and you're going to be in those positions. And when you are in those positions, always think about this panel discussion that we're having, because these are important conversations we need. When I came out in 2015, the first time I heard my voice was I spoke about my life in a newspaper, local newspaper. I told who I am, and I thought people will be so happy because this is California. Everybody loves me. No, I got such a backlash from Simi Valley, where I live here. People said, you're a man in a dress who needs medical help. You're just trying to get attention. And even the white trans people in my community, they said, Celia, you're just seeking attention. You're not even a real trans. I didn't understand what that meant. And I got back into the car and I read the newspaper. On the editor's column, it said all kinds of various comments. And I sat in the car and tears were rolling in my eyes. I was saying, is it really worth it to come out? I'm a professional. I have so much of experience. And why is gender such a barrier for me to come out? I need to change it. And I said, it is too hard for me. I can't do this. I had two choices at the time, these crucial moments. One is I can either keep cribbing about it, or I can say to hell with you and make a change. And I did that. I got out of my car. I directly went to a gun violence rally. I didn't know anybody there. And I was passionate about gun violence. I stood there about gun control. I went to a healthcare conference where there were no trans people. I stood there and I said, this is what trans people are going through. I went to an immigration rally where there were a lot of Latinos and kids who are locked in cages. And for the rally, we were standing there. I held the sign and I said, this is wrong. I went to places where trans people have never gone before, or I have not seen even my employees being there. But I was standing in those communities because your activism, your allyship starts in the community. And if you are an active ally in the community, in your home, and that's what you're going to do in the company. You can't be an activist in the company and go home and switch off. So if you're all an activist today, you carry that with you. And it's so important for your voice to be heard. If you are passionate about something, do that. And let your colleagues know that you're passionate about it. Everybody in my company, it's so accepting. They see that I add she and they pronouns in my email. And I seem to be the only person in the past couple of weeks using she and they pronouns. And people are probably even questioning as to why are you even talking about she and they pronouns? but you all know the oppression and the root cause of why we do it. And these are conversations we need to have. And this is how you can amplify your voice. And I remember when Kimberly Crankshaw had said that the future is not women, but intersectional identities. It's not Celia. Being trans is not my agenda in life. Being a good human being is my agenda in life. Being a good employee is not an agenda in life, but being a good human being in my workplace is my agenda. And a leader, even if I am promoted to a CEO or if I'm the best, whatever Elon Musk's of the world, to me, being a good human being is what is important. When you are in a good position in a company, it is important to move in your career and be successful, but always humanize it, that people will see through you, and not just you as a CEO, but they will see you as an amazing human being. My wife and my daughter are my best allies today. My wife accepted me after 17 years, and this April we'll be married for 25 years. It's difficult to come out in your own family. It's difficult to let your voice be heard within your own living room. And I made that happen, and I stood firm on it. Now my daughter is also 22 years, and she's a big ally for me. Allyship and your voice in your workplace, though you may feel that you're constrained, you're restricted, you're not allowed to speak up, speak up. I can tell you again, speak up. Your voice is important. If you're going through failures, speak up. It's about psychological safety. It's not that you always share about success. Share about failures in your office. And I used to talk about it. I was a boss of 120 people reporting to me here in Thousand Oaks, California, and had 600 people reporting to me in India. And I told them one thing: if you see me after 10 years in Disney World and say to your child that that was my boss, and I'm so proud that I was working for that boss, that means my job today has been accomplished. And I'm so proud to say that a lot of people that I worked with are vice presidents and CEOs of companies, and they personally sent me invitations on Facebook and LinkedIn. They keep on pinging me, and they're like, you know why? Because I was that vulnerable leader, and I want that to be heard. So I'm going to give this one later, but I'll talk about it later. But allyship is so important because we need to hold each other's hand in the beach while we're all standing and the wave comes. We want to hold each other's hand so we don't fall. That is true allyship in the workplace. Someone that day might be going through some difficult time. You want to hold the hand and walk, let them go in the front, or pull them and you go in the front. And that's how it is. And that's how I view allyship.
Thank you so much, Celia, just for that beautiful, beautiful visual as well. And I think oftentimes when we talk about allyship, we expect people to go in these spaces and know what they're supposed to be doing. And I appreciated the sentiment of I just showed up and I spoke up. And I'm assuming you asked questions there as well. And we're just curious about what was going on in a very authentically curious way that allowed you to really hear and see these people also as humans, just like you want people to see you. And so I really, really appreciate the context and the even storytelling aspect of the way that you show up in these spaces. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Celia. I also have another question, and we're going to start with Nani this time, which is, what are some gendered experiences that you have had in the workplace, and how did you combat them?
Yeah, thank you. And before I dig in, I'm just really, again, so grateful to be here and hear and learn from our fellow panelists as well. This is an incredible group of folks. When I think about the workplace and gendered experiences, there's a quote I always come back to from Dr. Crystal Jones. She said, there's a huge difference between the ideas of all are welcome here versus this was created with you in mind. And I always am thinking about that juxtaposition to wonder what spaces were created with multiple people and identities in mind, and which were created and say all are welcome here, but were built around a smaller, narrow group of identities. And when it comes to gender, how can we expand that so that more people can see themselves? And I could share some examples of tough gendered experiences I've seen in the workplace, but what I'd ask us to consider instead is the way that narrow view of what is centered often being for men, has been built into systems in the workplace across the country. And so a couple of things I would point out: systems. Celia gave a prominent example of this earlier, where things are built around a gender binary, or might assume that you as a woman have taken somebody else's last name. What are those sort of built into system things that insinuate this was not built for you and your unique experience and identity as it relates to your gender? Benefits as well. When you go to a company and they give you your package of benefits, what does it cover? And does it really cover your gender expression and the various ways that you need to take care of yourself based on your gender? Oftentimes not. Same with childcare. We know women are leaving the workforce in huge quantities because of the pandemic and because of childcare responsibilities. How are companies showing up to actually make sure that they are clear that they care about having women there, and that childcare is imperative and understood and a part of a human experience and not something that's a burden? And are companies having meetings when other people need to go be picking up their children? Do companies have proper facilities for lactating people? Often not. And so what are those sort of basic things that are in place and could be considered? There's even research to show that oftentimes the kind of standard temperature of American or many around the world office buildings is built around men's biology and physiological needs. And so for many women, it has been said to be much too cold. But because, again, who was centered when those were developed? I think we can just often question that. And of course, these are all sort of the systems, the non-spoken about pieces that happen every day, but there's also ways it shows up in conversations. There's a one that I often see in the workplace where women are deemed not strategic enough. Women get the job done. They are often to push towards the tactical work, which is so important as well, but often denied the way of being strategic and big picture and innovative because they've been so often pushed into the tactical work day to day. One other example I'll give is oftentimes, and many of you may have experienced this, in a group of people having a work meeting, who's taking the notes? Who's assumed to be taking the notes? Or when there's a social gathering, who's planning the parties? Is it always a woman? There's some of those norms that deserve to be questioned and wonder why they are and who's being centered. And so what I have done to combat that is first just name it. I think it's so powerful to name it. And to the allyship conversation we've had earlier today is if there are more people with that awareness around what is actually happening and why it's there and who is it really for, then we can start to turn it on its head and start to wonder if we could reimagine the workplace. But I think we have to use that lens of how can we build things with more people in mind and be more inclusive of diverse stakeholders. So that's how I would think about that question.
Thank you so much, Nani. That was definitely a question when our committee was creating it, that we were having all of these different intersections of what it means to show up in the workplace and have a gendered identity, and what that looks like for different people as well, of mothers, non-binary folks. And I really appreciate the high level institutional aspects that also really, really do need to be considered, because oftentimes the fixes that we make are, I guess men are supposed to take notes now, which isn't really getting to the root of anything. So I really appreciate that context. I'm going to read the question one more time and then have Celia again. What are some gendered experiences that you have had in the workplace, and how did you combat them?
I have an interesting experience to share. Before I came out, I was Daniel. And I've been in the business settings, the business meetings, happy hours, wearing a suit, holding beer with a bunch of office colleagues. And they would always make fun of women. Hey, look at that lady who presented. She had a great rack. Look at how she walked in. Did you see her dress? These conversations are not heard. I was in those conversations and I had to kind of smile and nod my head because my brown boss, mostly brown at the time, was like, you agree with me, right? And I was like, yeah. I was just nodding my head. And there were times when I couldn't because I could not after a point because who I was inside was not visible to them. They didn't see that I was trans at the time. I didn't want to come out to those people, but because they were insignificant in my journey. But after I quit the company that I was working for 20 years, it was such a toxic environment. I've seen gender being just stereotypical and marginalized. I know Nani beautifully mentioned the issues we are going through in the workplace, and I can't express it better. You just said it. I want to add one element to it. On LinkedIn recently, I posted an icon made by Apple for a pregnant man. And if you go into my LinkedIn and just read the comments in that section, there were a lot of people who were so angry, like, man and woman, there's no gender here. And I said, trans men can have babies. And they said, no, you can call yourself whatever you want. They're still women. Now, the problem I saw in these conversations are they're all from some company. They're working in a company, but when they are in a LinkedIn, they have a very different approach because the personal opinion keeps coming in. Now, there is a lot of bias in this environment, and especially working with men and women. And when you're looking at just the stereotypical categories, sometimes even your own, when it comes to race, it's a different conversation also. But just combating this one first, I looked at the comments in this on my LinkedIn ID, and it's everyone was writing things. What I found the interesting observation was there's so much of bias, and they are afraid, and someone is afraid that women are also afraid in that conversation that these people, I don't know who they are, they just call themselves gender non-binary, trans men, they're all taking away our privilege. No one is taking your privilege, by the way. Science is expanded. Science is trying to be inclusive, not exclusive. And I wrote this to one of the women, and she said, I don't agree with this. And I said, maybe I can educate you. And I approached them with a lot of grace. And I also try to help them understand, because some of them are ignorant. You can always educate people who are ignorant, but not people who are arrogant. And I always tell people, don't waste your time on arrogant folks. Don't go there. It's better spent on people who are ignorant. You educate them. And sometimes your office colleagues can be ignorant too. They probably don't know what you're doing. For instance, I was in a recruiting job fair. I had my resume and everything, and I gave my job fair, my resume to this person, and I said, I can do program management, and this is what I have. The recruiter took my resume and said, Celia, don't say you're trans. You look like a woman. You're so fine. You're okay. Don't worry about it. And that was not a compliment, by the way. And I said, I cannot be a woman because women are amazing people. I'm a trans woman. So don't say that I'm a woman. I don't want to pass like a woman. I'm not here to pass, but I'm here to present who I am. A lot of times in a workplace, trans people just want to pass as a woman, or they just want to get along with what is going on. Don't go with the flow. Swim against the stream. And that's what you need to do. And that's what I did. I could change the 30-year-old culture. And I remember there was a trans job fair This is an interesting experience I want to share because when I applied for a job at a senior executive position in City National Bank, the senior vice president of HR looked at my resume and she was like, wow, you have so much of experience. We need to really have you. And then she said, what position would you like? I said, I want that senior director position that you have. She said, Celia, that's so hard. I don't know if it's going to work. I said, why? And she said, my company is white, old men. They probably may not, appreciate a woman itself. And now how can I have a trans woman into that role? Think about it. And this was a senior vice president in a HR job fair. So I told her, give it a shot. Get me in front of them. I can convince them. I can exactly tell them what value I can add as an employee and what kind of culture, and they would see when they hire a person like me. I can sell myself, and that's what I've been doing. So she waited for 2 weeks, and then she sent an email at the end of the first week and said, Celia, I'm so sorry. I don't want to do this to you because I know that they will call you, but they will not hire you. They just want to see a trans woman because they want to check a box. I don't want to do it. Now that is called allyship. That woman there, she said, I cannot allow this in my company. I cannot let a trans person be humiliated. And that's the kind of people we need in our workplace. And that's the kind of gender experience I saw was valuable to me. And as we speak about, expanding the gender, it's so important for us to remember this word called allies, ALLIES. Now, A refers to acknowledge your privilege. L is to listen to your community, listen to the trans community, listen to the voice. The other L is to learn to unlearn. How to use they, them pronouns, I don't know, but you learn to work with people. You learn to understand, what oppression people are going through. And then I is to initiate tough conversations in your workplace and make tough decisions. That's I in the allies. E is to educate yourself and also you can educate others. S is being supportive by being involved in the community. Don't just say, oh, there's an AIDS thing going on, people, you can join this and put it in your diversity column, and companies just put all these wonderful posters, but they don't do anything about it. If you're doing an AIDS walk, AIDS run, participate in it. If you're doing a pride thing, participate in it. If you're doing something for breast cancer awareness, go there. Be there in person. Now that COVID is kind of dwindling down, wear your mask, whatever, but get out there, be involved. Don't sit in your home and say, my daughter was telling dad, I'm not going to get anything from Chick-fil-A. By the way, my daughter still calls me dad. And I said, I'm your dad. I cannot take that away because you have a wonderful mom. And sometimes it doesn't work, but to me, that's important. I'm just going to boycott Chick-fil-A because they don't allow LGBTQ community. I said, sweetheart, that's not the thing. You need to go there and make a difference. Talk to the manager, make a difference. And I did that in Costco. I walked into Costco and I said, my ID says Daniel, a male. Can I have an ID as Celia? And they were like, no, we can't give that because you are Daniel. And we can destroy Daniel and give you Celia. I said, no, you cannot destroy Daniel. I want both. And they said, no, it's not possible. I said, figure it out. And they gave me an ID now. I have a Costco ID as Celia and one as Daniel. Now, why it's so important to make these changes? Because we need to bring that culture in when you move on into this next generation, this is what it is. Gender is not a binary. Gender is a spectrum. And that's why these conversations are so important. And, I feel so honored to be among wonderful women and the wonderful faculty here because I feel like I'm at home. And this is important because I found a lot of my allies to be women and men and cisgender men and people who are not even in the trans community. They're all my allies. And that's how we build allyships in our workplace and keep doing it.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Celia. I really appreciated the way you really broke down allyship. And I know there's so many folks in our audience that are going to chew on that a little bit after this and really reflect on where they are in their journey of allyship. So thank you. I am excited for our next question, which is, we function off of a white colonized capitalistic informed idea of what professionalism is supposed to be? How can we navigate finding our most authentic form of leadership and professionalism? Understanding those also social constructs. Let's start with Brianna.
Thank you. I think this is my absolute favorite question, only because this is the work that I do. So I am a Gallup certified strengths coach. And so my work is really centered on helping people, again, articulate what they do well. And what I've realized in the research about, strengths, and for those of you who are not aware, Don Clifton studied the research question, what happens when we look at what's going right with people rather than fixate on what's wrong with them? And that fixating on what's wrong with them idea is really where our conventional approach to performance development and performance management comes from. We say, hey, Courtney, you're doing these two things pretty well, but here's 5 things that you're not. So let's build a plan around figuring out, you're not a good speaker. Let's put you in front of more speaker opportunities. You're not, good at this. So let's do that. And it's really demoralizing. It's to say, you don't have the, presence that we need, that executive presence, whatever the, heck that is, that's where our systems are rooted. But when you look at strength-based development, you say, hey, Courtney, you're doing these 2 things really well. How can I, as your leader, create more opportunities for you to keep working in this particular space? And what we've learned about strength-based development is that people who have the opportunity to do what they do best every day are 6 times as likely to be more engaged in their work. And they're also 3 times as likely to have a better overall quality of life. And so for me, when I think about, how do I navigate, these traditional systems, I have a report, a 25-page report that's given me some support to be able to say, hey, Brianna, these are the ways that you naturally, these are the talents that you have. And what we call strength is, talent combined with active, intentional work. That's what creates that near perfect performance every time. And those weaknesses become those things that I can do, but they just don't come as naturally to me. And so when I try to encourage people to think about, and even encourage myself to think about, how do I show up my most authentic self? I look at the things that I naturally do well, and I lean further into those. I don't apologize for, being a person who finds the language easily to be able to express my point. I have high communication. It's just naturally something that I will do. When I speak with a level of conviction that says, oh, she knows what she means. That's because I have high beliefs. So my core values are really just beaming, out of me. That might not be your lane, but there are some things that you do well. You have really, really good discipline. You'll stick to it. You'll do it. You've got high, significance. You want to work on projects that are really big and make an impact. I just encourage people to find those things. Think about what can I lose track of time doing? What are the things that I do where other people say, well, how did you figure that out? How it's and you can't even explain it well. And it's because you're well, that's just, I don't know. That's just who I am. And when we stop apologizing for being that person, then we find this level of confidence that allows us to be able to own how it is that we show up. And going back to, I think, what many of my panelists have said about I love, Nani, what you were saying about, 2 things could be the same at one time, but I'm not playing into, how upset you are or how bad you feel that I, was able to come up with this new thought and idea and you had to go think about it. But there's also a benefit to you having to go think about it. So the more that I take the time to, figure out, how it is that I show up, I think, Susanna, you mentioned it too about your communication style and being able to say, any assessment you take, there's usually 4 boxes that are you're this, you're this, you're this, you're that. If you line them all up, they're all about the same. That will tell you show up in this way. But what that helps you to remember is that there are likely 3 other general archetypes of how other people show up. And so when you prepare your speech or your conversation for how you naturally present, but you're also mindful of how other people communicate, then you're able to connect with the hearts and minds of all the people in the room. So while I'm a person who generally will go up what my husband says, every rung of the ladder when telling a story, I also have to be mindful that he wants me to get straight to the point. And so I don't lose my confidence if I go into a conversation aware that that's how he wants to speak. And we can have a little, dance together about, I'm going to give you a little bit of the story, but I'm not going to go so far down the rabbit hole because I respect and honor how you show up. And so my encouragement about, to myself every day is to own, who it is that I am and make no apology for it, but also make space for other people and how they show up. And I want to be very clear, and then I'll yield the floor, is that I'm not talking about code switching. So, which is something that we often have to do to be able to, adapt to sociocultural norms and things like that. But what I'm talking about is engaging different sides of your personality. No one gets mad at a chameleon for being green one moment and then walking over to the woods and being, are they in the woods? I don't know. Walking over somewhere and being, and being brown, still the same DNA, but I'm understanding my environment and that I have to shift a little bit to be able to show up well in this space. So long answer to say that I don't apologize for who I am, but again, I found the language to be able to articulate it, but also am mindful of who else is there so that I could speak to their hearts and minds as well.
Thank you so much. I think I'm just a visual person. And so the chameleon piece really resonated with me. And I was like audibly laughing. So I'm like, that's embarrassing. I'm alone in my apartment. But I also really appreciated the context of kind of the story that we're telling ourselves as we're navigating these things, where I don't see myself as a speaker, but I've heard a couple of people that have seen me in similar environments like this that will compliment me on being a speaker. And I'm like, for some reason, that word just like doesn't work for me. But the thing that does is conversationalist. Like I can hang out with the best of them and having a conversation. And that is engaging in both parts of communication for me. And so that works. But I think oftentimes when we think about professionalism, it's like you can have a conversation, but the trajectory of which you should be headed should be like being the authority, being the expert, being the thought leader as one of the only. And I'm like, no, there's a whole collective group of us behind the scenes here. This wasn't just my idea. And so giving credit where that's due. So thank you so much for that really insightful piece. I'm going to read the question again and then have Nani go. What function, we function off of a white colonized capitalistic informed idea of what professionalism is supposed to be. How can we navigate finding our most authentic form of leadership and professionalism?
Yeah, thank you. I think I could go on and on and on about how much I despise the idea of professionalism. And I talk about this frequently. Professionalism on its dictionary terms is to have or relate to a profession. However, it is loaded with, again, so much bias about what it is and what it isn't. And what it does by having this narrow definition is force people to shed their unique selves, their unique strengths, like Brianna shared, to fit a mold of something that was narrowly defined. And like I said, I'm a consultant with many organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a conversation around professionalism, and we'll ask people to close their eyes and imagine a professional person. And we'll ask them, what do you see? What do you see this person doing or behaving, or what do they look like? And often a few folks will be brave enough to say, I'm imagining a white man in a business suit, cisgender white man in a business suit. That's what professional is. And that's what we've been taught, right? And so how do we start to break that down and define professionalism for ourselves? I have the job and I'm going to come to it and define it in the way that's meaningful to me, my story, my identity, my background, my perspectives. And we often hear stories and research demonstrating that this white normative gendered definition of what professionalism is everywhere in the workplace. People are criticized for how they dress, how they wear their hair, how they speak, if they are emotional, if they have children around them, if they're on a Zoom call, if they are taking their call from the car because they had a doctor's appointment, whatever it is. All of these ways that we tell people that they are not good enough or that they are not right enough and that they're not professional enough. And so it's so important to criticize that and elevate that and ask questions of why. And so often workplaces have these unspoken norms, such as what is professional, what is leadership, what are our values, that are loaded and loaded and loaded with this bias. And so as folks may be looking at new companies in the next years or so, I really encourage you to dig into those norms with the people that you're speaking with in your interviews. Ask about the company values and ask who they're for and how that shows up for different people. What we have also seen in my work is that company values will say something around what is professional, and they'll say things like, speak your truth, be bold, say what you mean. And it's said as if this idea is something that everyone can achieve in their own way. But what it doesn't really make space for is that idea to be bold, to speak your truth, whatever, has different consequences for different people, shows up differently for different people, people's communication styles, strengths, etc., are different. And so what happens then is that people who are diverse and bring different perspectives or ways of working are considered not a good fit. So I always ask folks to question those norms that has been just accepted for so long and ask what they really mean, ask how they actually measure that, and wonder about how diverse people might be able to see themselves in that word or term.
Thank you. I really appreciate the context of also just around the terminology of professionalism, because it is a very charged term. And that was there was quite a bit of conversation around, like, how do we ask this question? Should we really use the word professional in this way? But how do we articulate that it's not necessarily what we're assimilating to, but moving towards more leadership skills? So thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful insight. So in the context of we're speaking, there's some elements within our School of Business that are not quite where I think we would all like to see them. And having this platform and having a space to have these conversations, it felt a bit off to not mention what that could look like for some of us. And so I chose to ask a more vulnerable question as our last question and really preface it in my own experience, but also acknowledging that I'm not the only one in this feeling these sorts of things. And then I would love to have Asuswena provide her answer, and then Celia next, please. So to start off, a teacher recently made me feel really insignificant and voiceless in their class. I felt hopelessly alone, shut down, and just honestly felt like I was going through the motions and pretended like I was okay. I would love to know what your advice is on having to deal with someone that reminds you of a past experience or past trauma, rendering me feeling angry, exhausted, voiceless, and still needing to interact with this person on a quite frequent basis. Asuswana, do you mind? I know it's a big question, but do you mind?
Yeah, no, of course.
And
And I definitely wanted to answer this question because I agree with you, Courtney. You're definitely not alone. And I think especially as females and as minority females, I think we will all go through this at one point or another, not only in our professional or career lives, but in our personal lives as well. And I definitely experienced this very early on in my career, where I had a manager who did a little bit of bias against me. She would exclude me from projects. She would assign the better projects, more exciting things to some of my other colleagues. And it was really shocking for me because I knew I did good work. I had received recognition for my work. I've received praise from others saying that I do good work. And yet I wasn't really getting an opportunity with this manager. And for me, being Mexican, I'm taught that if you work hard, you will be successful. And here I felt like I was working hard, I was showing up, and I was getting nowhere. And I really didn't know what to do. And my initial reaction was like you, a bit to shut down, want to walk away from this, didn't know what to do. I approached my sister about it. And I told her, look, I'm having this really difficult time. It's really, it's breaking me down. It's making me feel like I'm not important, like I'm not good at what I do. And it's breaking down my self-esteem. I'm not sure what to do here. And she really encouraged me to take this head on, to have that difficult conversation with my manager and explain, look, I feel like your behavior is excluding me. It's making me feel this way. Definitely not an easy conversation to have, but just try to be respectful, right? Try to recognize that people have different views, come from different perspectives, and just have an open, honest conversation. And this was the first row. I think it's always best to try to have this conversation one-on-one with this person. If you feel like it's not going anywhere, then I feel that it's definitely worth escalating and reaching out to other resources. So you have, if you're in a company setting, you have human resources, you have their manager, you have other managers. If you're in a school setting, you have counselors, you have your provost or other people that you can approach and say, look, I'm having this problem. I tried approaching with them. I'm not really seeing a change. And try to see if you can work it out. And it's difficult. It's definitely really difficult. But my approach at that time was, look, I'm not going to walk away from this. This is my career. I enjoy what I'm doing. And I think that I have the opportunity here to maybe teach my manager to think about other people. In the end, it was definitely an awkward time. So I understand it's very difficult, but just try to remember that you're not alone. It will help you in the long term, I think, because it really taught me how to deal with difficult situations, how to deal with conflict, how to deal with what we're going to call in the workplace sometimes is difficult characters. And I think it makes you a better person coming out of this, not only in your career, but also in your personal life, because you learn how to deal with different relationships. And I think it's really important to try to help people to have a different perspective and to open their objectives a little bit. And actually, I do want to add that this manager and I are still in contact, because even though the world is large, it's actually quite small in certain businesses, and you will run into each other. And even though it was difficult, in the end, we came out gracefully. I think we handled the situation as tactfully as we can, and we still run into each other, and we're very respectful for each other. And I think we both grew from this experience.
Thank you. I really appreciate I think it resonates with a lot of what we've already kind of mentioned here today too, of treating them like they're human, and your aspect of let's have that one-on-one conversation really, to me, resonates with let's treat them as though, let's humanize maybe that villain in our head a little bit more. So I really do appreciate that insight. So yeah, I would love to get your insights here as well.
Absolutely. I just wanted to, mention two incidents. One is in my high school. I remember my physics teacher telling me that you're worthless. You're not studying. I see you with a guitar on stage. I don't like it. I'm going to tell your parents. Very common in the Asian community. And I was so upset because to me, I was putting a lot of effort and he's not able to see it. So I went to his office and I looked at him and I said, sir, I'm doing all my best that I can, and I'm studying really hard. And what you said to me, it really hurt me. And that man was so shocked. He didn't know what to say, because it's ego. Again, when it comes to ego, sometimes there is ego played. So he said, yeah, whatever, just go, leave my office. And he told my parents that I'm so proud of your son. I mean, I hadn't come out at the time. I'm so proud of your son for, being very brave. And that's the only comedy. My parents were laughing at me. I think that carried me through my life. And the recent issue that I had, like Asusana talked about, such a graceful conversation, but mine wasn't graceful. I don't know, maybe it's because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, you can always have conversations with people. I always take it like a snowflake. Someone is trying to hit you with a snowflake. At the time it might hurt. It's probably going to create a little bit of a little jolt, but it's just a snowflake. And I cannot let myself get hurt and carried about it. And, my entire life is not going to get hurt, and I'm not going through surgery with a snowflake. So I don't over-engineer that. Sometimes I try to isolate and keep it negative. And in a work situation, this is going to happen for all of you. So nowadays, companies are talking about psychological safety. They talk about, raise your hand. Whenever there's a problem, bring it up. But here's a classic situation that I went through. So I was in this client situation where my hiring manager was an Asian woman. And she was very supportive, and sometimes she would intimidate me in the sense she would ask me to, I'm a senior person, even in the office, but she would ask me to schedule meetings for her. And she already had an admin to do that, but she will want me to do it. I was feeling like, why is she asking me to do it? And I still schedule meetings, and then suddenly she'll say, cancel the meeting. So I had a really hard time trying to cancel while I'm running a big program for COVID-19. You can imagine the magnitude of all the issues I'm dealing with, and then trying to schedule her meeting. And she complained because I'm not canceling her meeting because it's, I didn't do it right. So I didn't feel it wrong. And I kept telling her in a nice way that, hey, maybe I can use my time in a better way. What you said is a little this one. And she will just smile at me and say, did I intimidate you? I have that effect on people. And I was shocked when she said that all the time. And I was not sure how to handle this. And then there goes, and one day she didn't like me. So she complained about me to the HR saying, I don't want this person. The performance is very poor. And I was out of the team. And that caused a lot more issues. And now I was trying to communicate with her. I wrote her an email saying, I'm so sorry that I don't know what aspect of what I did upset you, but you don't want me to work with you. I don't know how to. I was trying to have a conversation at the most vulnerable level. I wanted to have that gracious conversation. I wanted to be the first person to tell her that, let's just talk it over. If there's something in my side which is wrong, I want to admit that, but I don't want to end with a very bad relationship here. She was not wanting to talk to me. She called the HR on me and she said, I don't want to talk to this person, because I was a consultant. I was consulting for her. I don't want to talk to this person. You deal with it. Now, here is a classic situation of a toxic leadership. Now, you want to really do your best. You want to really help. You want to be there. You have all the elements of positivity to create a workplace. And I'm raising my hand as high as I can, trying to say, I see something wrong here. And she doesn't care. Now, what do you do in a situation like this? As much as she complained to the HR, I raised a complaint too. And I said, this is what I did. And I'm also I told the HR that I am trying to be nice. I don't want to complain, but I was put in the situation where I have to do it. So I'm raising my hand and I'm telling you. And the HR asked me this question, why didn't you tell her that you were uncomfortable? Why didn't you do this? They were trying to counsel me, trying to find fault with me than the manager. Because they felt like she was right and I was wrong. So I said, when you're in a toxic environment, and if I raise a complaint against my manager, how is that going to help? Then she said, you could have gone to her manager. I said, that doesn't really work. You are HR, and that's because you're looking at your policy, and your policy says this is the escalation path. As a person who is working in a team, I want to resolve this. I want to just move on. I want to move to the next initiative. I want to move to the next meeting. I don't want to be dealing with this. The HR doesn't get it sometimes, because the policies are written that way, that they only go through these guidelines. And that's why what you did makes sense, because you really want to change, and sometimes confronting them directly really helps. But unfortunately, in this virtual world right now, I could not do it. And all my communication to her was disabled. I lost my access to the company itself. And the HR called me and said, you cannot work here anymore. And I'm like, seriously? Why is this? So my complaint was escalated so high that I sat with them and I resolved it. And that lady who raised a complaint against me, she was completely shut off. I feel sorry for her, of course, but not every situation works the same way. So we need to also be in a situation where we also have to take I want to be the bigger person here. I'm going to try to resolve it. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of strength. Like I spoke to my physics master in high school. I wanted to be that person who wants to give grace. And it's okay if you're in a situation where you might go through this. But remember, the toxic environment in your workplace, psychological safety, and all this only matters when it really, really boils down to when the rubber meets the road. So people talk about it in all the conferences and seminar, but in my opinion, and the lady who was actually doing this, I was actually organizing a conference for psychological safety. That's the irony of it. She was the one organizing the entire meeting, and I'm thinking to myself, isn't this nothing registering in your head because you're talking about psychological safety in the workplace? Raise your hand, and I'm doing it, and I'm raising my hand and doesn't get it, and you're just shutting me off. Classic case happens in the companies. So we are in a situation where if you feel, this is raise a hand, voice out, and don't let that emotionally down you. I literally went through PTSD. I tell you, I kid you not, I went through PTSD because I was so good in what I did. I believed in what I did, and I was very good in what I did. I told her, look, I have got an award from the CIO twice. I mean, the CIO doesn't give an award like that. I've got an award, and I am not bad in my work. I don't know what element of it made you feel like. And when you find a toxic boss like that, it's even worth quitting. You don't quit the company, but you need to make sure that the boss is quitting. And I always tell us, raise your hand, make sure that you escalate such issues, because what she did to you or what they did to you will happen to someone else, and they learn from it. So have that conversation, make them feel that you're sad, you're unhappy, and this could happen a lot. This is not even thinking about I'm trans. I don't think this issue was about trans, but she was wrong. And so it was classic.
Classic, definitely. I think a lot of us can relate to those feelings of frustration of, I just want to resolve this, or like, I want to get to the path of least resistance. But I appreciate the other side of the coin of sometimes you do all of this and the outcome isn't as clean cut as we would like, but you still got to do your work here too. So thank you for that, Celia. And we are moving on to questions from the audience. This one is specifically for Asuswena, which is, you said you may need to extend your timeline. I work as a designer, or I work as a freelance graphic designer. I want to be a sole proprietor, and sometimes I really am learning how long it takes to create a design. How have you been able to communicate when you need to extend a timeline?
Yes, that's a really good question and a difficult topic to address when you're slipping behind or you need to extend time. What I have found that actually really works is to come to your client or your manager or whoever you're reporting to, not just with the problem to say, oh, we're going to miss the timeline, but to come with the problem and the solution. So keep it direct, keep it honest. Don't try to make up all excuses. Be very clear. This is the problem, and this is what we're going to work on, and this is when I will have the final design. And approach it this way. Another strategy that can be helpful is to kind of break it up in chunks and maybe say, I can deliver this part of it now, and I'm working on the rest of it, and I will deliver the final package on this date. So always try to not just create the problem, but come with the problem and the solution. I find that that's usually the best strategy or the best approach to take.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a really beautiful and strategic response. This question is for Brianna, which is, I love that you are open to be challenged. How do you handle a situation in which you don't agree with what the other person is saying or proposing?
Thank you for the question. And I think it's easier for me to speak about this like in the work context. But I recognize, in all of my morning affirmations, I'm open to learning. I know I'm not always right. Like, we like to pump ourselves up and talk about like, I can do it. I know the thing, it's my turn. And all of those things are true, but also being open to, when I was in college, I learned a phrase that is still on my cover letters anytime I'm applying for a new position. That's, I seek to be a student of the industry. So I'm always open to receiving new ideas and new knowledge. And so if I'm not agreeing with the other person's perspective or what they're proposing for, say, like a work project, I like to take it back to, well, can you tell me more about that? Like say a little bit more, help me, compromise still matters. Like, is there an opportunity for us to be able to do a little bit of what you're doing and a little bit of what I'm doing? Do I need to yield completely, to be able to go that way? Because now once I've stepped back and realized, oh, right, like I can't turn everybody into twins. Like they're their own people. So I guess we need to do something different after all, right? So it's the idea of being, open, to different ideas, but also thinking about like, what is the scope of this project? Like there are some times that, maybe my vision is too big for what's possible right now. So going back to, Susanna's comment about where, what needs to be delivered. Like, if I'm thinking about, steps, 5 through 12, but we really need to get started, with steps 1 through 4, that I do have to yield. And so it's really this idea for me about like, what's the goal? What are our objectives? And being open to not being the most intelligent person in the room or holding all the cards, this idea about, office confidence, that I'm unapologetically able to articulate my strengths, but I also recognize the strengths of other people. I don't know all the things. So although it might hurt my, my little Leo pride that I'm not the one who's, in the middle of the scene, my greater goal is, what are we looking to accomplish? And being able to hear from others about what their ideas are is really more where I come from with that.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful insight. This question is from, or not from everyone, but for anyone. So how do you manage the cost of asking and challenging those actions in the workplace?
I can speak to this. When challenging things in the workplace that are going on and you feel that they might be wrong or biased or problematic, there are a couple of things I like to evaluate. Sometimes it may be the situation where you can speak up directly and talk to your manager or a leader about what you're noticing and provide some insight as to why this might be problematic and what a solution could be that might be more equitable. However, sometimes that is risky. And particularly for people of color, oftentimes being the one person of color, one of few, the risk being associated with, I'm a person of color who's always causing problems or always asking so many questions, or whatever assumption might be made about me, or whatever marginalized or excluded identity I hold, it's important to think also about allies. And we've had some great conversation here around allyship. How can you lean into somebody who has a little bit more positional power to speak up for you or with you? And think about that and have that person say, for maybe it's a man in a business meeting, to say, hey, I'm noticing that we're always deferring to this woman to take the notes. Why do we do that? Or maybe we should change up our social party plans and have more people take responsibility for that, right? How can you ask folks to step up for you or with you when it might be too risky for you to do it on your own? And what's nice about the allyship conversation is it also raises the collective awareness of the entire company or team, so that more people start to think about this and use that lens to challenge or criticize actions that could be biased or problematic too.
Thank you, Nani. That's such a critical way of thinking about it. I would love to hear if anyone else has any kind of advice on managing your intersectional identities and challenging conversations.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What is the question again? Mary, understanding intersectional identities?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you manage the cost of asking and challenging those actions in the workplace, which I assumed they were talking more about managing the intersectionality of being a person of color or gender maybe as well, and having those difficult conversations.
Now, I think in a workplace, you have the right to feel the sense of belonging. And it's important to bring in a concern to to your boss or to your HR whenever you feel that you're not respected, or you can raise your voice, but at the same time, you need to pick your battles on what you want to do. Because not every issue that you're going through will be, can be resolved. So you need to know what are the concerns that you really want to bring into your manager, or you want to speak up. And I felt that, recently, that whenever I raise a complaint, the HR always, the antenna goes up, because they pay extra attention to a brown trans woman of color. So I don't want to have the privilege. Sometimes it's like, oh, I have the privilege. I can say whatever I want. No, it's not right. So we need to pick our battles on what is worthwhile to raise a complaint, or you can also raise your voice and in a different way. It could be just saying that I just noticed. It's not a complaint, but it's just so if you see your business contact hotline in any company, they usually have something that you can always raise up. If you say something is wrong, or if you just want to make a note of something, you can always raise it up. And they keep a count on those, because if there are similar situations that are happening and they see across the board that such issues are coming from various other folks, then the company will start taking action on it. But they will not do it if it's just one person raising 10 complaints versus 10 people raising one complaint in a year. So you need to know what. So if you're raising an issue, be very mindful of what you're raising it about. Don't say this person just said something, they're very rude to me. Yeah, of course, but make sure that you always, you can bring it up, but substantiate it with something that is beneficial. So when you go to the HR, don't just complain, but also tell them the solution. Like when I made a complaint about an interview that didn't go well because the person who interviewed me had a bias, and I was supposed to be in that project. She didn't want to have me in the project and I waited for almost 8 months to raise my hand and say I had an issue, because I didn't want to raise an issue. And but sometimes you pick your battle, and then that's why it's important to know what would matter and also give a solution. So I said, maybe this person reacted this way because I have a solution for it. So when I gave my answer and said, maybe they have to have a right kind of policy, how to treat trans people, or how to have a Black identity, how to treat folks with who are Black. This company had issues all the time. I had spoken to people who have left the company, and some of the Black community folks who have left this company said that, hey, we had this issue, Celia, and I just want you to caution you. And even in spite of that, so I've spoken to people who had raised complaint also. And that also gave me a good idea to how to raise a complaint, what to do, but never stop from raising your voice. That's one thing you need to be very clear about, and speak up, because companies are willing to listen and they're willing to change. So, but pick your battles, pick your battles. That's what I will tell you.
Thank you so much for that insight. Michael actually brought up a really interesting piece that we haven't talked about today, which was how does ageism play a role in the workplace as well? And I would love to have some of y'all talk about that aspect of what it means to be stereotyped in your age as well.
That's a really great question. And I think especially for females, because as males get older, they're considered just more handsome, more wise. I think for females, they're viewed a bit differently. I see that especially more living here in Switzerland, where it is actually legal to ask your age when you're applying for something. And they do care about that, because the older you are, the more experience that you have. It means that the more cost you are. And a lot of companies like to try to have younger employees that are cheaper, less cost, will be lasting longer in the workplace. And so this is a really challenging aspect. And quite frankly, it's something that scares me a little bit if I'm thinking of staying in Switzerland long term, because it's definitely on my mind that I'm definitely not going to be getting any younger, right? But I think also one thing that sets us apart from younger people is the fact that we do have more knowledge, we do have more experience, we do have value, we've lived through a variety of things, and we can really have to focus on the value that we bring and the coaching that we can give to the younger people, who the next generation that are going to come in and take over. But it's a good question. Very challenging.
Thank you so much. And I believe I saw, Celia, you're unmuted. Did you want?
Yeah. No, I wanted to add to what Susanna had talked about. It's so important because, I'm 53. So the issues that I have when I apply for a job, they try to look at your LinkedIn, or they try to see when you graduated. They back calculate, and they understand what you're going through. But I'm very open about my age, my gender, my ethnicity, my disability. So if I have cardiovascular issues, I'm considered as disabled. So I do have, so I don't know how that works into this whole thing, but to me, when I give these parameters and apply for a job, I always have this bias as to whether they're going to hire me or not. So it's very interesting how companies look at, neurodiversity. When they look at age as an aspect, or gender, they're always looking at it. And then and they also say, oh, you don't have to decline at all. I mean, you don't have to declare your age or anything, because it's only required by the EEO. The federal government just needs data. So it's an optional thing. But they always figure it out during the interview. When you get past all that, when you get to the interview part of it, and you say, I have 23 years of experience working in the life sciences industry, they're like, you're old. I'm not going to hire you. So I've gone through that, but it's changing a little bit, based on how things can be. It's more about what is the work that I need to do, help me to understand. And that's how we approach this. And when companies start treating employees as resources, then we have a problem. You got to have that sense of belonging. Companies always talk about D and I. They don't talk about B or E. So you need to talk about equity and also equality, and then belonging. So that's lacking in the companies. When you have the sense of belonging, you won't mind hiring a person who's been in the industry for so many years, because you bring in a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience to the workforce and the work culture. And it comes with a lot of experience. So I cannot substitute that with someone who's just fresh out of college because they're asking for a lower salary. So yeah, we have a lot of bias there. It still needs to change. I don't think companies have done enough on that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that insight. I saw, Nani, that you added something to the chat. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? And we will be moving to kind of closing remarks, but we can wait for a couple minutes.
Sure, just a quick comment that ageism is definitely an issue in the workplace, and it shows up in a number of ways. I've seen it on the candidate side as an interviewer, hearing other folks who are interviewing candidates saying, this person they just didn't have enough energy. And it's worth asking, what does it actually mean, right? What does energy mean? Are you looking for a certain kind of person who's showing up a certain way? Because that feels pretty biased as well. So I think oftentimes in companies, particularly some tech companies that have a very younger demographic, some of that language can really be used to hide the fact that they're looking for a more homogenous group. And so it's worth questioning those sorts of statements or values.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been so excited to talk with all of you today. And I know I feel like I'm leaving with just that much more knowledge and pieces in my toolkit to be able to manage the workplace just that much better. And I hope that other people are having a very similar experience. I just keep seeing like people say, thank you, thank you, thank you, or copying different quotes that all of you have mentioned. So I know that it's definitely resonating with folks. And I would love to turn it over to our committee member, Evan.
Thank you, Courtney. Hi, all. I want to thank everyone for attending. My name is Evan Green. I'm the Executive Director for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the School of Business. I've worked with women of color in business, since I started at PSU. So this is, I believe, year 6 for us. And, I think it gets better and better each year. I really want to thank all the panelists really for sharing your insights, being vulnerable and being really honest. And I think really providing an opportunity for folks that are participating to learn some tangible things that they can take home with them. So I really, really want to thank you. I don't want to say too much. I think it's all already been said, but I want to thank people for coming and to continue to look out for activities that we're doing in the School of Business. It's really important for us to, as the slogan says, have knowledge serve the city. But I think even more importantly than that, within the School of Business, it's important for us to do our bit or our part to help to, I think, really transform and transcend the business world in Portland. I think Celia mentioned it earlier, just kind of mentioning that, just feeling comfortable in the space. And that's really who we want to be. That's who we want to educate and who we want to graduate into the community. People that can allow others to feel comfortable and to create spaces that I think have a true sense of community where we can have an impact and really start to move the needle. So again, I want to thank everybody for their time. Happy Friday. You all are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will have some gifts for you all that will be going out at some point. We're still curating them, but don't you worry, they're going to be great. I think that's all I got. And I really want to actually, just before we go, I really, really, really want to highlight Natalie Galvin, who honestly was our fearless leader through this process. I may be the one closing and have the title, but Natalie truly, truly created this event and was the one reaching out, was the one pulling the committee together, was the one really, really, I think, supporting this process and ensuring that it could be the success that it was. So I would be remiss in not, truly recognizing and calling out Natalie for all of her efforts and the work that she's done on this, because I think she's truly the leader and truly the, the face and the strength behind this activity. So I want to make sure that Natalie is recognized. So thank you, Natalie. And thank you all for participating, and have a wonderful weekend. The sun decided to come out. If you're in Portland, go enjoy it. Thank you much. Have a good one.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Courtney, that was amazing. Go you. Good job.
You were great. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Celia,
nice to
I'm
see
very
you
proud
again,
of you.
Celia.
You're